So, welcome. This is the YouTube session that accompanies my podcast on Stravinsky's three pieces for solo clarinet. So, what I want to do today is show you some of the elements that go together to make these three pieces that might help with a performance preparation or just trying to make sense of what you're seeing and listening to when you hear this piece. So, the first thing to have a look at in this first movement is how is it composed? If you're not used to playing music in this sort of style, which is effectively atonal or involving like a row of notes, then this hopefully will help you to kind of make sense of how to work out the phrasing, the patterns that there are there, and just various things that I've found interesting in the years that I've spent studying and performing this piece. So if we look first of all at the initial phrase that gives us the sort of thematic material. So we have this 3-bar phrase here. First thing to notice, one is how it unfolds, how the notes unfold, and how that is then used to as a rhythmic and a melodic shape through the first half of the piece. So we can see here that what we're actually creating is it's not exactly a tone row in this sort of Schoenbergian sense, but we have got a series of notes, and as we go through the first few bars up until the end of bar 5, so to around about here, we find that we have the notes A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, and G sharp. There is one little variation on there, which is one of Stravinsky's favoured shifts, which is between F sharp and F natural. You can see here we have an F natural for the first time. But apart from that, the notes that we have, starting on A, being our very first note, they're the notes of the E major scale. So if you reorientate these and starting on E, you've got all the notes of E major, or a mode based on the 5th degree of the scale. So the opening of this, as I say, rhythmically and notationally, pitch-wise, it gradually unfolds. We have a tone to begin with, and then a third, and then a fourth, and then a fifth, and then a seventh. And those are all important intervals as we go through. So it's kind of like the melody is almost describing two parts, a bit like a two-part invention. And then this opening figure that we have is then repeated, but with the notes in a slightly different order. So the second phrase, which starts here in bar 4 and takes us to the end of bar 5, you can see that it starts in the same way. Slightly different rhythms, but the notes are identical. And all that happens is that the last two tones, the G sharp and the F sharp that we have in bar 2 here, those are switched around. So we have the F sharp and the G sharp, have them the other way around. So that's the first thing to notice. And those first 5 bars give us basically all of the pitches that we are interested in this first movement. The exceptions to that can be found down in bar 18 and 19, which is here. And also in the very final 2 bars, bars 29 and 30. In these bars, interestingly, we get a change from the sharps, the accidentals that are sharps and naturals, but basically we've got lots of sharps. And in these 2 places, for reasons known best to Stravinsky alone, he changes the sharps to flats. And as you can see, apart from the F sharp and G sharp that we have here and here, and the last in bar 29 there, all of the other accidentals are flats, and it just happens in those 2 places. The rest of this movement, everything is couched in terms of sharps. Now, I have yet to find a particular reason, apart from that there are these contrasting moments that happen at pivotal points, or just after the midway point in bar 18, and then right at the very end in bar 29 and 30, we have these flats, which gives us this sort of counterpoint to the main melodic shape and tonality of the movement. There's only one A sharp, so adding to that list, there's one A sharp which happens down here. It's the only time that happens in this movement, and that's just a little variation on this this A tonality here. This happens a lot in this movement, and is something that Stravinsky does a lot. So they're just extra coloured notes from the general tonal palette that we have. The next most interesting thing to note, I think, is the notes that Stravinsky chooses to draw our attention to in the very first half of the piece, exactly the first 15 measures, the first half of the piece. So he draws our attention to very specific tones drawn from our tonal palette, and he does that by using a tenuto mark. So here we have the first one, which is a G sharp. Then we have C sharp and D sharp. And as we track through, we have G sharp, F sharp, D sharp with their grace notes that are attached. Then we have another G sharp, and then we move into a slightly different tail end to this section where we have lots of A's that are drawn to our attention. So these tenuto notes track through another line of interest, if you like. And as you can see, if you take a look at this particular part here, where the tones have all been introduced, Stravinsky uses these notes, the G sharp, the F sharp, the C sharp, and the D sharp. Those are the main notes that he's using, and he uses them all in close succession here. So even though there's not a tenuto here, for example, and you might expect there to be one to kind of mirror what happened in the first phrase, the F sharp is also important. We can see it being added here as one of the tenuto notes. But in this bit here, you can see we've got G sharp, F sharp, C sharp, D sharp, and they form the notes that are of most importance in the first half of the piece. Another thing to notice, just in terms of, again, things to consider when you're approaching this, is in the first half of the piece, a lot of the phrases end with an upward motion. So I'm just marking them in here. So the sort of cadence points that we have, they have this sort of upward gesture, and here. And then in the second half of this, or in the second quarter of the piece, we then see a change in this, which is instigated by this new A that comes in here. We then have this downward gesture that is repeated several times. Many times we've got it starting from this A, ta-da-dee-dum, ta-da-dee-dum. And then the phrases after that have this sort of, as it were, almost an answering quality. Occasionally we have these sort of upward ones in the middle of a phrase, but they generally end with a downward one. So we've got downward here, and we have kind of an upward one here. And there's an upward one right at the end, kind of almost sort of questioning to finish. So that's just an interesting thing when you're kind of charting through from the beginning and you're looking at how the phrases work we have to begin with these sort of upward questioning ones, and then on the way sort of from the second quarter we have these descending ones. Just thinking about those tenutos again that I was just talking about, as I said, the tenutos are there for exactly the first 15 bars, which takes us through to here. This is the midpoint. And after that, interestingly, for the second half of the piece, there's not a single tenuto marked. It doesn't mean that we haven't got places where we're drawing our attention to, but it's definitely the case that Stravinsky has shown us the importance of these notes. He's singled them out in the first half, and in the second half, they kind of, the shapes play out a little bit more fluidly than they do in the first half. There are some other little interesting points, really just points of notice, really, just things that I've discovered that I think I find quite interesting. If you look at bar 5 and into bar 6, so here I'm using another colour just to try and show this in green now. These bars are this bar and a bit here, these notes. There's the notes are used again in it's like a musical anagram that we have here. So these notes have a similar kind of shape. It's almost as if they're not in retrograde or anything specific like that, but it's the only place that we have that F natural where we have this sort of combination of notes that involves the seventh between the F natural and the E, and there is this sort of interplay between the notes, either expanding out or contracting. I just find that quite interesting. And then another thing just to notice is this whole movement is all in the lower chalumeau register of the clarinet. So the very highest note that you have is the A natural here. And the intervals, there are lots of intervals of a major seventh or of a major ninth. So we see this right at the very beginning. So here we have this major ninth, which happens at the start. And then we have the sevenths, of which there are many, either ascending or descending. We find that interval. And the largest interval is a tenth, which happens just before the end. So here we have an E to a G sharp. But the A natural here, this A, this is the highest note. And Stravinsky will have known this, that this, one semitone higher, the B flat, and you find yourself at the limit of the lower register, and he exploits the whole range of the instrument. So I use all these different colours here just to help show some of the different elements that I think are interesting. You can see some of the things that are some of the themes, like I was saying, this falling A figure. I haven't marked it out necessarily, but here, which is when we start getting this falling figure with an A tenuto, and the A is often switched with another note. So here, the A and the C sharp are switched round. It's part of the same idea, but we have this falling figure 4 times, one after the other, just with this tiny little D sharp in between. And then you got other shapes as well. So here we've got this little figuration where we've got, and that repeats again. So you've often got these little clusters of notes that are repeated, and then it moves on. They take on other characteristics, or they sort of evolve out of the shape. It's a beautiful first movement, and very cleverly constructed, so that it's always evolving. It's always playing out in a sort of organic way. So we never really feel like we're quite hearing the same shapes and intervals and expression more than once, apart from these sort of repeating figures that offer us this little moment of repose before we decide where we go next. So that's the first movement. I hope that's sort of helpful in terms of working out some of the ways of looking at the phrasing. And then we have a look at the second movement. So the second movement's very different, but again, related to the first in that it's also asking for the clarinet in A. But whereas the first movement has been in the lower register. This movement exploits the clarion register, the next register up, and a little bit up into the altissimo register. Again, the points of interest here is we have this sort of what's called, in the podcast I refer to as the melodic ribbon, and that's this idea that because there is no time signature and there are no bar lines, that there is a freedom that comes with that. Even though the music looks incredibly tightly ordered in terms of its rhythm, because there isn't a time signature, there's a degree of flexibility. But having said that, there is this sort of this tightness that is implied because everything is so closely notated rhythmically. And when you have this market here, which is telling you that a quaver equals quaver, a semiquaver equals semiquaver, and a group of 3 semiquavers takes the place of a quaver, and all of that equals 168 beats. So it's fast. So the first thing to notice is that because there's no time signature, that means that certain places like here, for example, where he writes semiquaver equals semiquaver, what this effectively makes the music feel like is it makes it feel like you've got time signature of 6/16 at the beginning, and these are bars, if you like, and then you've got an 8/16 bar here, where the grouping is 3 plus 3 plus 2. So that's kind of what the feeling is there. And then we have something that's kind of going into, it would be like 8/8. A group of 3, a group of 3, and a group of 2. So you get this yabba da dabba 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 da dee ya dee yun dun dee. So that's the kind of the idea about what's going on at the beginning rhythmically, and that carries on all the way through. So we're kind of living moment for moment in terms of how many beats there are in the bar, and they're implied rather than them being specific as they are in the third movement. So the other thing to look at in this is the way that the tonal centres shift around. Again, this isn't sort of music in a straightforward tonal sense of there being a scale. As you can see, there's an awful lot of chromaticism. So as we go through, we can see that there's a lot of shifts of a semitone, which could be giving the impression of it moving from a major to a minor mode, with the shift being if that was the third. So if we go through at the beginning, we've definitely got D is our tonal centre. So we have Ds all over the place at the beginnings of our groupings. And that establishes the sort of tonal centre at the beginning as being D. But I don't think that necessarily means that it's the tonic, if you like. Because no sooner as we started with the Ds, then we have Gs as being the note that is of interest. So you could say that the beginning is kind of like a dominant moving to a tonic of G, particularly because as the Gs come back at the very end of the piece, as we can see here. So we have G being our centre a lot in this final section. So you might say that we're starting on kind of a dominant tonality and then moving to what would be tonic with the G. Then other things that we have, of course, we do have moments where we have the F coming in. So the F starts to have a play here. And then we go back to having our Ds. And the Fs. So yeah, there's more D here. Again, it's just looking at the kind of the places where it's on a strong beat. And we have F there and F here as well. Then eventually we introduce C as well, as you can imagine. If we look through, so we've got C coming in here, and then this section here has definitely got lots of C in it, and finally before ending on our G. And as what's the one that's missing from all of this, of course, is the E, and that comes in very much in the B section of the piece. So we have a definite sort of interplay between E and F. So it starts with E's, and then the same material, this material, is then shifted up, and so we have an axis that's working on F. And that's definitely the interplay that you have, is this sort of swinging, just pivoting between an E and an F as being the basis. And then the final section, for the most part, we cover a number of the other pitch centres, but basically we've got G all the way through to the end. So those are little points that are interesting in terms of the pitch centres for the second movement. In of itself, it has its own particular character, with the outer section being this melodic ribbon and the middle section being this kind of more, I always think it's slightly amphibian, kind of hopping like a frog figure, which has its own contrasting character. And whereas the beginning is quite sort of bold and shiny with its mezzo forte marking, and the middle has this more, as I say, amphibian pianissimo. So the characters are very much inherent in the way that he's using the notation, but I think it's useful just to go through and look at these kind of tonal centres in terms of how you might shape each of the outer sections particularly. Obviously you can really see the sections clearly marked here, so this is really kind of where you've got your A section, your B section, and then you've got a modified A section. And then finally we have the last movement. This one arguably is a movement that was written at a later date, a more contemporaneous from when the piece was published and when it was dedicated and gifted to Werner Reinhart, the Swiss philanthropist for whom the Soldier's Tale owes its existence, seeing as he bankrolled the piece. This third movement asks for the clarinet in B flat, and is very much an example of Stravinsky's passion of the time, which is to do with jazz, black jazz music coming from America and hitting Europe around the First World War and shortly afterwards. And Stravinsky was known to be greatly enamoured with this new style of music, ragtime, and jazz and improvisation, the freedom that came and the almost hypnotic quality that some improvisations could have. And he uses this to great effect in this third movement. You can see that slightly differently from the second movement, if you can see an evolution from the second movement, is where he doesn't use a meter and bar lines. He reverts to a practice that he demonstrated in works, the famous works like the Rite of Spring, for example, where he uses very tightly, strictly delineated meters, often constantly changing. So if you look through just this first couple of lines, where we've got 2/4, 2/4, 2/4, 5/16, 3/16, 3/8, 2/8, 3/8, which could be construed as 6/16, and then we turn over the page, and so it goes on. There's constant shifting meter, and even when the meter doesn't shift, you often have these little obsessional, improvised moments going around on a little riff, and I'll talk about those in a moment. So rhythm is really the first port of interest. So what Stravinsky is doing is he often uses a limited number of notes, a palette of notes, which gradually shift out of the sort of improvised rhythmic obsession that goes on. So at the beginning here we can see bra bi da ba 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 dee ba 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 ga dum bum 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 bra ba li dee do do bi. So those first three bars that we have, the focus in a tonal sense is on the notes of A flat, B flat, and G to a greater or lesser extent. Whoops. So, and then we have these little momentary shifts where that shifts up to an A natural and a B natural, so around here. But then it shifts back. So the main notes that I think are of interest here are the notes A flat and B flat. And then this shifts very slightly in the second line, so we get B natural being, so we've moved up a semitone, and then we have a little play around with those tones. So we have here A sharp, B, this little clutch, which is then repeated. A sharp, and B. And Stravinsky uses lots of rhythmic device, so he's showing you the rhythmic shapes that he's going to use here. So this tri ta di da bra di da at the beginning, and then this yaga da da. So if I put so we've got this kind of idea, and then we've got this idea, and then you've got this triplet followed by a series of semiquavers. It starts there and then it's immediately repeated, but it looks different on the page. So dilly da dilly da 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 dilly da 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 da, and it happens again. And then we have this couplet idea, which is another one. There's the ti da ta da tia ta da ta da. So you can see, let's see if I just put those in a different colour. So you've got this figure here with this section repeated, and then you've got the three upbeat semiquavers again. Here again you can see there's our triplet figure with a group of semiquavers after it, and then we've got our couplets again. And so that sort of sets out the main rhythmic things. There's a new one here we have, which is kind of a linking passage where we have this ba-dee ba-da, ba-dee ba-da. So then, once we get onto this second page, we are into the realms of, we're moving tonality again. So we introduce B sharps here, which can also be, of course, is a C natural. So this is happening. This section here, so we've got this B sharps being introduced, and then we would sort of return to our A flat B flat obsession that we had from the beginning with the same kind of rhythm, around here, with our triplet figure that we had from before. So we've got the triplet figure with semiquavers after it. Again, you can see it here. The other thing to notice, just as we're going down the page, is a new device. So we have this sort of dotted figure that I just showed you here, this bit. So we have that. And then something new to kind of draw is this indication here. Sombre le son subito. So at the very beginning of the piece, if I just turn the page backwards, it says forte from one end to the other, from beginning to end, and it's played at this fast speed of quaver equals 160. So he gives us that indication, but then within that, to give the movement shape, what he asks for is these sort of drops in the colour or the intensity. So sombre le son literally means sort of darken or shadow the sound suddenly. So it happens first of all there, as I've marked in blue, and again here, and it's always followed by a crescendo, which is not always easy to see, but it says crescendo poco a poco, and you have the same thing here. Crescendo, 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 back up to forte. And then another final sombre le son just before the end with a crescendo again. So that's just a thing that keeps the momentum going through this high octane third movement. So just returning to my sort of tonal centres, so we've showed those particular points of interest, and then when we get to this place here, this is kind of the beginning of a new section that lasts through until about here. So this middle section is, in many ways, is less complex. So the rhythms become more sort of improvised in the sense that we have these little obsessions around little rhythmic groupings. So the different things that we explore, we have this couplet idea that we had at the beginning. So we can see that here. There's tida 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 tida, and once we've got out of that obsession, then it moves into something else, and then we have it again here. You can see these sort of couplets, and again here. The other device we have is groups of three, so we can see it in the sombre here. This group of pa-dee-dum, 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 and it gradually just shifts, one note shifts to move us forwards, to propel us forwards. There's also a slightly different group of three, which is a group like a 3/16 figure, but it's more lopsided. It's a bit like three-legged, if you like. Da, gi ga, gi ga, gi ga. So it's here in yellow. I'm going to give it. So you've got this thing where you've got it's semiquaver, quaver, semiquaver, quaver. So here, that's the rhythm going like that. Da, di ga, gita, gita. So it's like a record, an old style, vinyl record getting stuck in the groove, and then you tip out of that by going back into the couplets. Daggy 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 betty diddy gonna digo 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 dagu 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 dagu. So that's a rhythmic thing that's really interesting. So our tonal centers here, we definitely have D flat for the first time, and we've got this A sharp B natural thing again that's going on here, and then we've got A flat being dominant. You can see A flat carries all the way through, and then it shifts here. We have an A natural, and that becomes our sort of dominant note for a bit. And then F down here, which then subtly shifts to F sharp, and then we've got this F natural, F sharp axis going on all the way through this passage here. And then D finally becomes our sort of center, when here we've got this as you can see, D's all the way through. There's D's every way along here, all the way through this line. And then we return to our opening obsession, and we return to B flat, which is where we started. If you remember, here we had this sort of A flat to B flat, and the B flat being the first note. So that's the kind of the shape with the tonal centers, if you like, harmonically going through, and also looking at some of the rhythmic elements that make this piece really exciting and driving and dynamic. So the final thing we just look at this to work out how to play some of these things is looking at the articulation. So a lot of the things that we have is to do with accents and staccatos at the ends of slurs, for example, or we even have dagger accents if we look there. These are all things that we need to really point out to make sure that the performance is really, really vivid. Okay, so I hope that's helpful and is a good companion to the podcast. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. You can find all the details of the podcasts on my website, which is www.stuart-king.com. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to exploring another masterwork with you very soon. Bye for now.